Howdy, boys and girls. Mr. Herring here with 5th grade social studies back at you. We are wrapping up our unit today on the Civil War with the war ends with a little touch of Reconstruction. Our learn it is the same. I can explain the roles played by significant individuals during the Civil War, including Jefferson Davis, Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee, and Abraham Lincoln, as well as those significant battles such as Fort Sumter, Bull Run, Antietam, Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and the surrender at Appomattox. Our essential question remains the same: what is worth fighting for? And so today we're going to wrap up this unit talking about the war coming to a conclusion um, and finishing this unit off. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So the war ends and Reconstruction. The war ends in 1865 and Reconstruction lasts until about 1877. The Gettysburg Address. The battlefield of Gettysburg was made into a national cemetery. On November 19th, 1863, about 15,000 people gathered at this cemetery. Lincoln gave one of America's most famous speeches here, where he reminded the nation to keep the American dream alive and to not let the lives lost go in vain. On my Schoology page, I have the Gettysburg Address in the Wednesday folder. Please make sure you watch that short video about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It's not very long, but it's a very good speech that he gives. The siege of Vicksburg in January through July of 1863. Grant captures the Mississippi River finally. It took him a very long time to do so, but he finally captures the Mississippi River. It's a turning point battle in the West, leading to victory of the Union Army in the Civil War. It fulfilled the western portion of the Anaconda Plan put forth, cutting the Confederacy into two pieces. It was a very nasty battle. Vicksburg, Mississippi is where the Appomattox courthouse is, where the surrender occurs. 1865, with the South's resources completely exhausted, literally Grant is out of men. Had he not run out of men and resources, the South very well could have won that war. But because he just ran out of men and manpower, he was forced to surrender or retreat. Grant pursued Lee all the way to Petersburg. The siege of Petersburg lasted about 9 months, and on April 9th, finally, Lee surrendered to Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse in Vicksburg, Mississippi. This is a picture of Appomattox Courthouse in 1865. Notice the trees. I want you to pay close attention to the trees here, the chimney in the background, the fence, and then this is the courthouse today. The two trees remain. This picture was taken, I think I visited it, it was, I don't know, 2021, 22, not that long ago, on our way to Hoover, Alabama. We got to stop and take a tour, and it's beautiful on the inside. It's been restored to the exact same way it was in 1865. This is the site of the Confederate surrender and the official end of the Civil War. Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865, officially bringing the Civil War to a conclusion. Again, here on the right, you see the Union with Ulysses S. Grant in the blue, and of course, on the left here, you have the Confederacy in their gray uniform. There we go. Number two, a loss for the nation. At the conclusion of the war has come to an end. April 14th, 1865, just a few days after the war ends, President Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater where he was assassinated. He had been murdered for political reasons by a man named John Wilkes Booth, who supported the Confederacy at the time. Before Lincoln died, he had achieved his goal and restored the Union. Remember, we talked about this in class, where Lincoln's main goal was to keep the Union intact. There's a video on the Schoology page, Lincoln Assassinated. It details how John Wilkes Booth carried out the plan of assassinating President Lincoln. Number three, Reconstruction takes place after his death. After the war, the South was in ruins, of course. Lincoln had a plan for rebuilding the South prior to his assassination, but after Lincoln was assassinated, Vice President Andrew Johnson took over as president. And Johnson was sympathetic to the South. He did not agree with the Republicans at the time and their measures of revenge, as he said, against the South for their role in the war. The period after the Civil War, when laws were passed to rebuild and heal the nation, is called Reconstruction. And Johnson had a very different idea of how he wanted to heal the South or repair the South. And the Republicans in the Congress did not like this at all. In fact, he did not get along with just about anybody in Congress at the time. Everybody fought everything that he tried to do when he assumed office. Congress and Johnson argued over how to rebuild the South. Johnson wanted to pardon the Southerners who swore loyalty to the United States. In fact, he made a statement saying, as long as you pledge loyalty to our restored country, you will receive a full pardon. This did not sit well with Congress at all. He also wanted to let states back into the Union as long as they outlaw slavery. And again, that is not what the Congress wanted. They had a very strict set of rules that the southern states had to follow and a set of steps they had to take before they could be reunited with the Union. Congress thought these plans were just too gentle on the South because most of Congress felt that the South was responsible for this war and this destruction of our country. And then we had the Civil Rights Act, 1866. Congress began to create a new plan for Reconstruction. They passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which granted free men full legal equality. The president sent federal troops to the South to keep order and enforce emancipation of the slaves. They required a new state constitution from the former Confederate states, and the act prevented previous Confederate leaders from running or voting for elected office. They could no longer hold a federal office again. When it all comes down to it, Congress decides that Johnson is just not fit for office, and so Johnson is angry with Congress and he vetoed Congress's plan. But of course, we know the rules, and if in checks and balances, if we get 2/3 of Congress to pass a law, then they can override his veto, and that's exactly what they did. And Congress got very angry that Johnson tried to stop their plan, and they tried to impeach him. In fact, they brought 2 articles of impeachment against Johnson. Fortunately for Johnson, he was found not guilty, but his ability to run the nation was no longer effective. It was weakened so much that he just couldn't run the nation anymore. He had literally no power. Congress fought him on everything. He couldn't get anything passed. He couldn't get anything done. And so when the 4-year term was up, Johnson walks away from the presidency. Before Lincoln's assassination, he created something called the Freedmen's Bureau to help freed slaves. Now, we talked about this in class. African American slaves could not read, could not write, had never been in a social society. They didn't know how society functioned. Most of them spent their entire lives on plantations, didn't know how to purchase things. And so this bureau was set up to help compensate for those setbacks. The bureau built schools and hospitals. It rebuilt roads and tried to create a free public education system that this would address the African Americans in the South. The South disliked many of these changes, and like the Congress did to Johnson, the South fought every single step of the way. They felt that they could not pay the new taxes and that the North was taking advantage of their situation. All of the costs for this Freedmen's Bureau was assessed to the South, and this really angered the South. And to be fair, they really couldn't afford it. The destruction of the South was so grave that they just couldn't afford these new taxes. And so the South fought them on everything, and this made matters even worse. And because of it, we get something called segregation. The whites believed that if we can't have slavery, we can't separate ourselves. Segregation occurred even though the slaves were free. Segregation is that separation of people, and it's usually by race, in schools, theaters, railroad cars, buses, water fountains, uh, you name it, churches, everything. Uh, it was just everybody was separate. Some southern states passed these things called black codes. These laws denied African American men the right to vote. They prevented the slaves the right to vote, even though the 15th Amendment had been passed, and it was a protected right under the 15th Amendment. Um, and when they were held accountable for this, that's when intimidation begins to set in. The Civil Rights Act was designed to protect against all these codes, but the South was very stubborn in their ways, and they just couldn't see themselves living side by side with freed slaves. So Congress passed the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery or ended slavery. They passed the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equality under the law for all citizens and granted citizenship for all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. And then finally, they passed the 15th Amendment, which gave every male the right to vote, regardless of the race. Every former Confederate state had to approve the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments before they could be allowed back into the United States. And most southern states did not go along with these rights, the 14th and 15th Amendment especially. They respected the 13th Amendment and freed the slaves, but the 14th and 15th they really had trouble with, which led to segregation and intimidation. After Reconstruction, the South remained the poorest section of the country. The northern whites began to lose interest in the problems of the South. Now that the war is over, Uncle Tom's Cabin is long forgotten. The war is out of sight, out of mind, and so the North just kind of forgets about the South. And this is kind of a bad thing for the Black Americans living in the South because they're no longer really protected by the North. Many African Americans and poor whites became stuck in a system of sharecropping. We talked about this. The sharecropping is that system in which the wealthy landowners let people rent their land to farm it, and the renter pays rent with a share of the crops that they raise. And many people get stuck in this system, my family included. Like I showed you in class the pictures of my sharecropping ancestors. It's a terrible system. It just doesn't allow for one to get ahead. And so it lasted for a really long time. And in fact, the South, to be fair, it never really recovered. The Deep South never really recovered from that. There's a great negative reaction to Congress and the laws that they force on the South. Some white Southerners opposed all these changes because they happened very rapidly. And so a group called the Ku Klux Klan, better known as the KKK, was established, and they used terror to gain control. White Southerners put the Jim Crow laws into place to reinforce segregation, and some states even charged a poll tax to keep African Americans from voting. True freedom for freed slaves would remain for some time out of reach. We talked about the poll tax where, if you're an African American barely making ends meet and you have a choice to vote or feed your family, then you're probably going to feed your family. So this is a very easy way for the Southerners to keep the blacks from voting, and it was very effective. The Jim Crow laws, there's a video on the Schoology page for today. I need you to watch that video. It explains the Jim Crow laws in detail, just how many they were. There's only one question on the unit test about them, but you need to watch that video, okay? All right, and that wraps up. The war comes to an end and Reconstruction. If you're watching this video because you were absent and you come back to class, please make sure you find me and get the note page for your journal. And I will see you when you return. Have a great day, guys.